Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us for our monthly guest speaker series. I am Peter Hartz, Manager of Career Services here at GIA Education Carlsbad. I'd first like to say welcome to all of our GIA students, our alumni, and staff. I'd also like to welcome all of our viewers that are streaming this on our Facebook Live stream. And I do ask that we hold all of our questions till the end of the presentation. And for those of you that are joining us through Facebook Live, please submit your questions as they come to you throughout the presentation. For today's presentation, we are thrilled to be welcoming the Supervisor of Field Gemology from GIA Bangkok. To give you a little information about our speaker here today, he's been with the team since 2015. He's visited gemstone mining areas in Africa, Asia, and Europe, where he's been responsible for sample collection. He now oversees the Field Gemology Department in GIA Bangkok, where he curates GIA's colored stone research collection. He holds a master's degree in geology with a focus on geodynamics and geofluids from KU Leuven in Belgium. He also holds a graduate gemologist diploma as well as his FGA diploma from Gem A. Please help me welcome with a warm round of applause, Wim Vertriest.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. So before I get started, I just want to warn you, I'm going to split this presentation in 3 pieces. So the first part is I'll talk a little bit about field gemology, what it is, why we do it, and how do we do it. And then we'll go into Mozambican rubies. First, we'll talk a little bit about the history, the trading of it. And then at the end, we'll actually look at the stones, what they are, how they react to treatment. So buckle up, because here we go. So intro to field gemology, it's important to know why labs exist, why labs do field gemology, why there are researchers in gemstone laboratories. It's important to realize that gemological laboratories exist for one reason. That is to help the trade. The trade can function without it, but they ask gemstone laboratories the questions they have. And those questions have changed over time. So if we look at the first question that was asked to gemstone laboratories, it is, what is it? What is my stone? Is this a piece of glass? Is this a piece of ruby? Is this a sapphire? Is this a spinel? That is what people wanted to know. That is what people asked gemological laboratories. So basic identification. Of course, over time, those questions changed. With new challenges, new technological developments, new questions came up. And the question was, is my stone real? That came up with the rise of synthetics, mainly synthetic emeralds, that people wanted to know, is this emerald mined in nature? Was it grown in a factory? That also applies to treatments, when treatment detection became important, because 50 years ago, nobody really cared whether their stone was treated or not. Now everybody wants to know. And it's a significant part of the GG courses as well, is treatment detection. So that all goes in that is it real question. And then about 15 years ago, a new question came up, a question that caused a lot of problems and is causing a lot of problems today. And that is, where is it from? Origin of the stone. People started asking it for important colored stones first, but that question gets asked for more and more stones nowadays. So gemological labs are faced with this question that clients are asking, where is my stone from? So we need to adapt to that. We need to develop new strategies for that. How do we address this problem? GIA chooses, let me talk about this first. Why do you care about origin? Because that's also an important question. Why do people want to know the origin? There's a bunch of different reasons for it. And one of the main reasons is just marketing and auction houses. Auction houses hold a very powerful position in the industry because auction houses traditionally go for the publicly available, very high value goods. Gemstones are emotional purchases. You buy this for your loved ones. And when you buy something for your loved ones, you want the best for them. What is the best? It's what is put on the cover of a magazine. So if Christie's, Sotheby's, or another auction house puts a cashmere sapphire on the cover of their magazine, that is what you want to buy for your loved ones. So you want what is on the cover there. Another reason that comes up nowadays more and more is transparency and supply chain. We see it everywhere. If you go to a restaurant right now, you basically know what you eat, you know where it was grown, you know who harvested it. That all goes for gemstones as well. People want to know, where does my stone come from? Who mined it? Who cut it? Who traded it? Which places did it go? So that whole transparency of supply chain all links back to origin. Because if you know what the origin is, you actually start to care about what the origin is. Because if you know that your ruby is from Myanmar, that immediately invokes images of Myanmar, the beautiful temples, the mysterious jungles. Same applies for all the other origins, of course. And then there's public awareness and education. More people than ever are educated about gemstones. Because it is so easy to get education. Right now you just you get your smartphone, you Google ruby from Myanmar, and you get 1,000 web pages that will give you more information. So people are aware of it. On top of that, if you go the more traditional way and you take a book, if you read a book about rubies, it starts usually with the sentence, ruby is the red variety of corundum. And the second line is usually, traditionally the best rubies come from Myanmar. If that's all you know about rubies, then you want a ruby from Myanmar. You don't want the Mozambican, you don't want the Vietnamese, you don't want an Afghani. So people who educate themselves, they are aware that there are different sources and that those sources are perceived differently. Maybe the best example is the best book on ruby and sapphire, which is called Ruby and Sapphire by Richard Hughes. There's a chapter in there on judging quality. Judging quality, he gives a disclaimer, but who reads disclaimers anyway? He judges quality based on the country of origin. So when he talks about quality of sapphires, the first one he discusses is Kashmir. The second one is Myanmar. The third one is Sri Lanka. And the last one is Australia. He says you shouldn't look at the ranking, but the fact that he makes this ranking says enough. So GIA wants to do origin according to a scientific approach. Scientific approach requires 3 elements, and we're just going to go over those real quick. The first thing you need is qualified staff. Qualified staff, people that are adequately trained, people with enough experience that are looking at your gemstones. Those are easy to find, but very hard to grow because it takes a lot of experience to have that qualified staff. The second part that comes in is advanced instruments. Advanced instruments are very difficult to operate, very easy to get. Everyone with a bit of money can buy the most advanced technology out there, but it is very difficult to get the right numbers out of it. GIA has teams of people with PhDs in physics, solid-state chemistry, solid-state physics, chemistry, to operate all those machines, and that is their only job, just to get the correct numbers, correct spectra out of these machines. Modern-day gemology cannot work without all these advanced instruments. But of course, even if you have the most qualified staff, the most advanced instruments, if you throw all those two together and you don't give them the right samples to work on, everything they do is useless. Those people need the right samples to work on, because if you don't know what stone you're studying, everything that you do research-wise is useless. And that is where field gemology comes in, to provide those reliable samples to GIA researchers and to assist in the research that GIA does. So this reliable collection, what makes a collection reliable? I can explain this to you in 45 minutes, but I'm just going to use this quote from Sir David Attenborough, who is way more respected than I am. So he says that a research library associated with collections is almost of greater importance than the object themselves. Unless you know where it came from exactly and when it came from exactly, you're missing a lot of very, very important information. And that information not only comes from the object, but from the circumstances of documentation. What that means is that if you grab a bunch of stones, all you have is a bunch of stones. That's what he says here. What you need is you need to know as much information about those stones as you can. Where were they bought? What were the circumstances? How much did I pay for them? What else did I find there? Who did I buy them from? What was the weather like? What day was this bought? Because all that information could be important. So how do we put that in practice? Because that's a beautiful theory. It is more challenging than it sounds. Building a reliable collection requires one thing mainly. That is going where the stones are, because that's where you get your actual reliable samples. So this is an example where we find the Ethiopian sapphires that are mined here along this dry riverbed. Going there guarantees you that you find reliable Ethiopian sapphires that you're pretty sure are from Ethiopia. Of course, going there took us almost 18 months. It is much easier to go to this place, because this is where the highest collection of Ethiopian sapphires in the world is found. It's just going to shows. So it's important to also visit those places, because those are the easiest places to find samples. Of course, they're not as reliable, but it is a very good place to find good quality samples, to see what's new, because everything comes together in those shows, in trade centers, permanent or temporary. Temporary like the Tucson Gem Shows, permanent like the Bangkok Trade Centers, for example. So when we collect a stone, we collect a lot of information that goes with it. Mainly we collect information about the stone itself. So what is this stone? What else did we find with it? Is it treated or is it untreated? Because it's important to collect both. Also the locality. What is this place called? Because a lot of people work with those locality names, but also the GPS coordinates associated with it. GPS coordinates of the mine, GPS coordinates of the place where you got it, because those are not always the same two places. And then most easy to understand is the buying conditions, which is the relation to the mining process. What is the relation of me buying this, me getting the sample, and where the sample actually comes from? And just to explain that a little bit, I'll just go over the classification that GIA developed to describe the buying conditions, the relation to the mining process. So the first type that we have is A-type. A-type means a sample mined by the gemologist. I grab my hammer, go to a rock, hit the rock, 10-carat ruby comes out. That has never happened before, but I keep trying. But when you do that, you're pretty sure that that stone comes from that locality. So that is an A-type sample, 100% sure that this comes from this mine. This is an example of my colleague, Dr. Palki, where he's collecting pink sapphires in the Greenland ruby mines. A B-type sample is when a gemologist has witnessed the mining. People that have been to gem mines know that a lot of the value can be in a little piece. So if you pick up one stone, you can walk out potentially with $1 million. So a lot of miners don't want you touching anything. You keep your hands in your pockets and that's it. So you're not always able to hammer stones out of the rock wall to pick up things from the ground. So when you already see people mining, like we've seen these Burmese miners that were looking for sapphires, that is still very reliable because we've seen those guys take the stones out of the ground. We haven't done it ourselves, but we witnessed it happening. So that would be a B-type sample, still extremely reliable. A C-type sample is when we collect it at the mine, but we haven't seen it mining. A lot of time, the easiest example is just when you go to a mine, there's a guy working there and he says, I found this morning. You're still at the mine, you haven't seen the stone come out of the mine, but you get it from the miner. Still pretty reliable. Another example is in bigger companies, like this is at the Mozambican Ruby mines, where they have a sort house on site, so the rubies haven't left the site, they're still at the mine, but that is where all the rubies are sorted, so you're still pretty sure that these are from Mozambique. D-type means that you collect it from a miner, but not at the mine. So here we left the mine site, but the guy you get it from is still the guy who pulled it out of the ground. Here we met this guy on his way home in Mogok. The Mogok Valley is right below here. He was on his way and he's like, I found this morning right on the other side of the hill. So that is a little bit reliable because we don't exactly know where these stones come from, but we're still fairly sure about the rough region where they're from. Then there's E-type samples collected from a secondary source, a trader close to the mine, usually in the local trade centers. Here's me negotiating with a power couple of cobalt spinel dealers. It's not a joke, but this were some of the toughest negotiations I ever had with a 4-year-old, because she was actually in charge of the stones because she got these from her mom. I didn't get them. But there were some really nice cobalt spinels. So here we're not really sure where they're from. They're from a local trade center. So they could be from this valley, they could be from 50 kilometers further. They could even be from the other side of the world. But the fact that you're still in proximity of the mines gives you a good indication, but it is not very reliable. And then, of course, there's F-type samples. F-type samples is collected from a trader in an international market. Everything I buy in Tucson, everything I buy in Hong Kong is F-type samples. This is us collecting Madagascar sapphires in the place where there's the most Madagascar sapphires in the world, Sri Lanka. Because the easiest place to get Madagascar sapphires is in the markets in Sri Lanka, because all the goods go there. So here we just looked at Madagascar sapphires for about 4 hours straight, knowing very well that they're in Sri Lanka. So everything you buy there is pretty unreliable. But it is still important to collect those stones, because sometimes you don't have any other option. Going to Madagascar and the mines there is a lot more complicated than going to Sri Lanka or even buying them in Bangkok. So sometimes we just have to work with these type of materials. Just to give you an idea about our collection, the GIA Colored Stone Research Collection right now is based in Bangkok. There's satellite collections in every colored stone locality that GIA has. So that's Carlsbad, New York, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. They have their own set of most common rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. But the vast majority of stones for research purposes is based in Bangkok. So it's almost 23,000 samples, little over 1 million carats, and that was curated over 95 expeditions in the last 10 years. So it's a huge amount of stones that is available exclusively for research for GIA researchers. And this gives you an idea of the sample types. So A-type is the ones that we mine ourselves. F-types is bought in the international market. Just to give you an idea how much samples we have. So it's actually pretty rare to have stones that we mine ourselves. Most of them are also pretty low grade, because the chance of finding a gem in the 2 days that you spend on a mine site and being able to collect it and take it home are very slim. So the vast majority is bought from miners off-site from the mine. Those are stones that are usually a bit higher quality. Those are stones that have been selected already. So you see D and E-type is most of what we start our work on. But usually when we start research projects, we start with E or F-type samples, and we work our way down to A-type samples. And as long as all of that data matches, we're still pretty confident in our E and F-type samples. The focus is on ruby, sapphire, and emerald. Those are the 3 main gems that GIA offers country of origin determination on. We do it on some other gems too, and we pick up other gems along the way. Like a lot of important ruby localities are also the same spinel localities. Places like Mogok produce a vast variety of gems, so we collect different things there. When you go to northern Tanzania, the tanzanite mines are nearby, so we try to pay a visit there as well, just for future research purposes. And we visit new localities and old localities. New localities like the Ethiopian emerald mines that were only discovered 2.5 years ago. It's important to go there to update your research collection, but it's also important to go back to the old places like Sri Lanka and Mogok, where they've been mining for millennia, but where they still find new gemstones, they still find new places. So you have to go back to all those places continuously. This gives you an idea of which stones we have in our collection. You can see blue sapphire and ruby is the vast majority. This ruby includes pink sapphire, because from a research point of view, pink sapphires and rubies are basically the same thing. Emeralds, spinel, fancy sapphire, most of those are yellows. And then there's others. Other includes tourmalines, but also rock samples, samples for geological studies, and so on. These are the places where we've done our expedition. I'm pretty sure you have an idea of the color code that I'm using here. That's pretty straightforward. So you see that most of it is happening here around the Himalayas, western side and eastern side, and East Africa. Those are the main producing gem regions in the world. So that's where we pay most of our visits. So just to summarize that, the role of a GIA field gemologist is really to manage that collection, maintaining it, expanding it, but most of all making sure it's used. Encouraging GIA researchers to use those samples, not only GIA researchers, but also partnering academic institutes, that people work on those stones. Because even if you have a reliable collection that is perfectly documented, it is still just a collection. You need data on all those stones, you need information, you need to work with them, you need to slice them in pieces, you need to take inclusion photos, analyze the chemistry, because that is the data that you need to support country of origin determination services. Of course, it's important to stay in touch with the trade. The trade doesn't stand still. New places are found, new stones are discovered, new treatments are developed every day right now as we speak. So it's important for GIA to be able to be in touch with the trade so we can identify new treatments. And I'll bring that up again with the Mozambican Ruby treatments later, because those were very important treatments and very challenging for us to identify. And then, work with GIA research teams on treatment experiments, where we do our own treatment experiments so we can see stones before and after. If you rely exclusively on the trade, you only know what a treated stone looked like. While if we do it ourselves, we can document it every step of the way. It's very labor intensive, but it teaches us a lot. Origin documentation, making summaries of what Thai rubies look like, and making sure that all that information is updated and spread throughout the world in the form of articles. And then there's also supporting GIA education. Supporting GIA education means that we document the trade for GIA educational purposes, photos, videos, interviews that all go into GIA class materials, that go into GNG. And we highlight different aspects of the gem trade there. So we go everywhere from people who find the gemstones, who mine the gemstones, all the way to the people who buy them there, trade them, people who make the legislation, the government, who is often an important factor in gem trading countries, all the way to jewelers, retailers, or even clients. So we have the opinion of all those steps of the trade. We have the insights from all those steps of the trade that we can share with GIA students, like we're doing right now. And just to summarize, I want to give you this little anecdote that really gives you the slogan of GIA Field Gemology. As you can see, this is a sapphire mine in Kanchanaburi, Western Thailand. I've looked up Kanchanaburi in literature, and the most recent article I could find is 1995. In 1995, somebody wrote, "There is no more sapphire mining in Kanchanaburi. Nobody is pulling sapphires out of the ground." I was like, maybe I should go check it out. I drove over there. It's a 4-hour drive from the Bangkok lab. I show up. It's the biggest sapphire mine I've seen in my life. So I think the main slogan for GIA Field Gemology is, if you don't go, you don't know. Remember that. Don't rely on what someone else has written. Go verify it for yourself. Because if we hadn't been there, wouldn't have known that this mine is still producing sapphires that we analyzed. After analysis, those sapphires matched exactly a population of sapphires that came into the lab and that we weren't able to identify before. So by going there, we were able to identify Kanchanaburi sapphires and were able to give a bit less inconclusive origins on blue sapphires in the lab. Just so that you don't believe everything that's written, go check it out for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about Mozambican Ruby now. Mozambican Ruby is a very interesting story. It's a very turbulent story. It's a very chaotic story, but it's very well documented. It only started 10 years ago, so we're going to go through it right now. It's a bit confusing because we're going to be jumping a bit from locality to locality, but I'm going to try my best to guide you through it. So first of all, Mozambique is right here. So everyone's aware of it. Carlsbad's right here. So it's pretty far away in southern Africa. Geology-wise, it's located in what we call the East African orogeny, nicknamed the Mozambique Belt. The Mozambique Belt, which comprises, obviously, Mozambique and a large part of East Africa, but also other countries, parts of Antarctica, parts of Australia, Sri Lanka, and southern India. So that already explains a lot why you can see here southern Tanzania, Madagascar, Sri Lanka, why the gems there look so similar. Because geologically, this is all the same thing. Mozambique is a part of that as well. So this gives you an idea of some of the gems that are related to this geological unit. And you can see that it goes all the way from green gems, Ethiopian emerald, all the way down to Cuprian tourmaline, the Paraíba-like tourmaline from Mozambique. So it's a huge variety of gemstones. It's one of the richest gem areas in the world, that belt that stretches from southern Ethiopia to central Mozambique, including Madagascar. So the history of Mozambican Ruby, it's important to realize what happened before Mozambican Ruby. So before Mozambican ruby, the trade has been dominated by rubies from Asia for forever, basically. Before there was Mozambican ruby, all rubies came from Mogok, Myanmar. Of course, there were some other sources, but before the 1960s, Mogok was the dominant source of rubies. That changed when Myanmar closed itself due to regime changes, and the trade started looking for another source, which they found in a neighboring country, Thailand, on the border of Thailand, Cambodia. Very different kind of ruby, but it worked for the trade because there was enough to supply it. That was the dominant source until the mid-90s, when Myanmar started opening up and when a new deposit was found in Myanmar. The deposit is called Mai Shu, produces again another type of ruby, but really produces large volumes in very attractive colors. So that became the most dominant source until 2009. Nobody could ever challenge these deposits. So there's been other deposits, other discoveries that came up, but they've never been able to challenge those big three, Mogok, Siam, which is Thailand, Cambodia, and Mai Shu. Mainly because they either lack the volume, like Vietnamese rubies, absolutely beautiful stones, but there just wasn't enough to go around. Winza, Tanzania, which is by connoisseurs still considered as one of the finest color rubies ever found, only produced rubies for about 8 months, and only the really fine stones were really fine. Stones didn't react to treatment, so everything that wasn't in the top 1% could not be enhanced. So that deposit just died a very fast and painful death. Other deposits just lacked the quality. With quality, I mean clarity or color. John Saul mine in Kenya is still regarded as the finest color ruby in the world. People use it as a trade name. This is John Saul Color. However, there was never a faceted gem found there. All of it was cabochon grade, carving grade. But the color is truly amazing. Other places like Morogoro, Tanzania produced really big rubies, but they were very low grade and often very silky, which led to giving them a grayish cast, so not very desirable. And almost every other ruby deposit that you find has an issue like these. So take a quick look at Mozambique. This is northern Mozambique, the border with Tanzania. I've highlighted 2 spots here, Songea and Tunduru, which are very important sapphire localities. So there's a lot of people mining there. And then I've highlighted 2 pieces here, these 2 blocks. They're in the Nyassa hunting block, also called the Nyassa Reserve. This is one of the biggest patches of wild forest in the world. It is impenetrable bush. There's almost no one living there. It's really remote. Not the nicest place to live. One of the nicest places in the world to visit. But it's very inhospitable terrain. It's not nice to live there. Then I've highlighted this place here, Monte Pues, and you can see it's right on the highway, which is something important that we'll bring out later. So if we look at the early discoveries, I've looked up Mozambican ruby. The earliest mention I could find is from an article from 1991, where they review the Tucson Gem Show. And there, John Koivula mentions rubies from a number of sources were also seen. Cabochon grade material recently produced in Mozambique is similar in appearance to ruby from Tanzania. That's all we have. That is the entire prehistory of Mozambican ruby, is those 3 lines. So there's something there, there's an indication, but it's not a lot to go on. Now the first confirmed source of Mozambican ruby was in a place called Ruambeze. Ruambeze in the Nyassa National Reserve, so in that patch of bushland in northern Mozambique. You can see the material, some of it's an attractive color, but most of it is what we call cabochon grade. Cabochon grade, like it matches with John Koivula's description, inclusions that match Tanzanian rubies. So this is probably the place that produced those rubies that John described in his Tucson review. And when we went there, people told us like, yeah, we've been mining here for almost 30 years, since the early 90s. So that all makes sense. But because it is such a remote location, because it is in a protected zone, the Nyassa Reserve just says it all, it's a protected area, mining never really took off there. So it never became successful. There were never a lot of stones mined there, but some of it came out. Now a little bit later that year, in a place called Mzawize, facet grade ruby was found. Really nice color, bigger stones. And this attracted a lot of artisanal miners. With a lot, I mean probably more than 10,000. So 10,000 people go into this protected area, Nyassa, to start mining there. And they find a lot of stones. In a little less than a year later, that area was closed because dry season came on and police started chasing people out. Why is that dry season important? For a number of reasons. There's nothing to drink. All the bushes lose their leaves, so you can't hide from the police, which sounds really funny, but it is the main reason, because you disappear. If you step 2 meters into that bush, you disappear, while in the dry season, you can see 2 kilometers far. So that's a really big issue. Plus, there's no water to wash your stones. When you pull them out of the ground, you need to clean them, you need to wash them, you need to process that gravel, and water is critical for it. So no water, no mining. So in less than a year later, this entire place was abandoned as well. So this is in September 2008. Then a few months later, April 2009, rubies were found near Montepuez. Montepuez is a little bit further. You can see this is a picture from Montepuez. It's next to a highway, not in a reserve, so in unprotected land, which means that there is potential for large-scale mining. Someone can actually apply for a mining license and start a mine there, which is impossible in those protected reserves. Initially, there were 2 mine sites, one called Namahaka, one called Namahumbir. Namahaka produced low grade, Namahumbir produced facet grade. Really nice stones. This is an example of a super juicy 10-carat rough that was found in Namahumbir. Incredible color, and this is why people love Mozambique. This is what caused people to have a crush on Mozambique, why everyone went there. So for these kind of stones, large international crowds started gathering in Montepuez, both for the mining and for the trading. So the government saw that there's literally tens of thousands of people coming in, so they'd like, okay, we need to get this a little bit under control. So they decided to give one of the areas, Namahaka, that is free for artisanal miners. If you want to come and mine here, sure, no problem. We're not going to give you any issues with that. The other area, Namahumbir, where they found the facet grade, this kind of material, was sold to a company called Muriti. Muriti was a local Mozambican company. They already had some mineral rights and timber rights, so they could use all the wood from that land, but they didn't have the ruby mining rights. They got those in 2009. So this is what the minings looked like in 2009. So this is dominance of artisanal minings. Everywhere you look, you see guys digging holes in the middle of the bush. Estimated 50,000 of these guys out there during the peak. So there's a lot of people digging, a lot of rubies coming out. Informal trading. Of course, in the first years, all the rubies were bought by international traders. All these rubies come out of the ground, and what then? They don't just end up on someone's finger. Someone needs to buy them there in the bush. Those are experienced traders that have cash available, that know the African way. So the first ones there were the African traders. Most of these guys are from West Africa, in a place in Guinea. You see them all over the world. Those are the main African bush traders, like we call them. And they supply a large chunk of the rough that comes into the international trade. They were there because they had the experience. Quickly, the Thai and Sri Lankan people, the kings of the rubies and the kings of sapphires, followed there very quickly to get those rubies at the source while they could. This is an example of Mr. Lucky, who opened an office there, who still lives there for the last 10 years, buys rubies for cash in Mozambique from the artisanal miners. My Portuguese is really bad, but I understand that this slogan is very good ruby, very good money. So he's built a very solid business out of buying rubies at the source. But of course, it takes a lot of guts to just go as a foreigner into a place like northern Mozambique and start opening a buying office there, paying cash for everything. But you can see that they quickly got into the spirit of the local customs, and these are pictures from 2011, 2012 of the Thai trading community that lives in this tiny village in northern Mozambique, celebrating Thai traditional New Year called Songkran, the water festival. So they're just There's more than 500 Thai buyers living in that village. They opened up a temple. They flew in monks from Chantaburi to ordain that temple. So it's really a Thai community that formed there that is all buying from the artisanal communities and bringing those stones to Thailand. So why does it go to Thailand? There's two reasons. First of all, Bangkok, capital of Thailand, is also the capital of the ruby trading. Second, Chantaburi, a city in eastern Thailand, is the capital of ruby treatment. If you see a treated ruby, there's 95% chance that it has been treated in Chantaburi, even today. Some people come to me and tell me, what is going on in Chantaburi? There's nothing happening there anymore. There's nothing happening on the street, but the factories are busy as ever. Chantaburi is really the innovation hub of ruby treatment, is still the main center where most of the volume of rubies gets treated nowadays. So the first Mozambican rubies that came in, here's a nice example. Very intensely colored, very strong fluorescence, but you can see very flat crystals. The sizes can be really big, like this one, but they're only clean in the small sizes. And the Thai traders call this bodang, meaning the red mine, because of the intense color. So you see very attractive stones, and this is what the first Mozambican rubies look like. So by summer 2010, which is a year after the discovery of Montepuez, Montepuez is the most important source of ruby for the Thai trade. So a trade that has been dominated by Asian deposits for millennia was kicked off its throne in less than 12 months by this African newcomer. By 2011, so less than a year later, Mozambican ruby is the dominant ruby globally. By 2012, if you go to a trade show where a lot of ruby traders are exhibiting their goods, half of what they have in their booth is Mozambican, and maybe the other half is Burmese. You have to realize that rubies don't go bad. Rubies that were mined 2,000 years ago are still in the trade. So in a span of less than 2 years, Mozambique put itself on the same level as deposits that had been producing for more than 2,000 years. So the volume that came out is incredible. Important to note, all this ruby left Mozambique undocumented. There was no regulation, there were no official mining, there were no export procedures, so all these stones just left Mozambique undocumented. Now, of course, when you've got 50,000 people working in this place, they don't all work in a plot that is the size of this room. Those guys spread out and they start digging everywhere. So they find rubies in a number of places. So Namahaka was the first one to be discovered, probably during the construction of the highway, which is this one right here, because it's right on the highway. The village of Namahumbir is right here. I didn't indicate it, because that probably correlates with these deposits here. Deposit called Maninganais, which translates as nice quality. Deposit called glass, because of the glass-like properties of the rubies that were found there. And other places called Nakaka, Napula. So a lot of places were discovered in a huge area. I mean, the distance between Nakaka and Napula is more than 40 kilometers. So it really is a big place where they find all these rubies. Most of the ruby is found in the central area, places called Mugloto, Ntoro, Maninganais, and Glass. So what really put Mozambican ruby on the map, we've seen those first stones, that was everyone's crush on Mozambique. This is true love. This is a different type of ruby, and it has everything that the other ruby doesn't have. The other ones were really small, had a really intense color. These are really large, bulky. With bulky, I mean they're not flat. You can cut a really nice, deep, well-proportioned stone out of it. The drawback is that they have a bit of a darker color. So their color is not as attractive, and their fluorescence is lower. This caused Thai people to call them bosom, the orange mine, because a lot of the stones have a little bit of an orange tint, or are usually what they call a closed color, a tad too dark. But you can see that this 40-carat stone called the Rhino ruby is a magnificent ruby. I don't know how big the cut stone was, but this stone was internally flawless, incredible piece of rough. So to summarize this, the variety of Mozambican ruby, we have these two types. You have this really intense red fluorescent. You have this bit more orangey, darker, lower fluorescent. That gives you different color shades. That gives you all the variety you need. The fact that you have everything from loop clean to opaque stones, stones that are below 1 millimeter to pieces of rough that are 100 carat, stones that don't need treatment, stone that can be heated, stone that can be treated in all kinds of different ways, which means that you cover the entire spectrum. You have Mozambican rubies that are massive stones. You have Mozambican rubies that you can use for melee. You have Mozambican rubies that go for $1 million a carat. You have Mozambican rubies that go for $1 a kilo. And everything in between. You have Mozambican rubies that are actually pink sapphires, to purple sapphires, to orange sapphires, and everything in between. So the sheer variety of Mozambican ruby is just incredible. As you can see here, two very fine rubies, but both of them look very different. So we've got this amazing trade, we've got this incredible stones. Of course, this attracts attention. And the first one to really come in was Gemfields. Gemfields is a London-based natural resource company. They own a couple of licenses for mining gemstones throughout the world. Most famous is probably the Zambian emerald. They also used to own a Zambian amethyst claim. I heard they sold that like 6 weeks ago. But they also have emerald claims in Ethiopia, sapphire claims in Madagascar, and then of course they got the ruby claims in Mozambique. They also own the luxury goods brand Fabergé, but that's not important for this story. So to give you an overview of the whole history of Gemfields, we have to go back a bit. In November 2009, you remember that the two deposits that were found, one was given to the artisanal miners, the other was given to this company called Muriti. Muriti, who has absolutely no experience in gemstone mining. They have all this land on paper, but how are you stopping 50,000 artisanal miners if you don't know how to mine gemstones yourself? So it took them about 2 years to figure out, okay, we need a partner, find the right partner. They partnered with Gemfields, and they formed a company called Montepuez Ruby Mining. Why it's called that way, that's pretty straightforward. But so it took them 2 years to actually form that alliance. And then it took until 2014, so still 3 more years, to sell the first Gemfields rubies. That means that the first legal mining, the first documented mining with permission from the government happened in 2011. The first legal export documented with government approval with taxes paid happened in 2014. The sales of Gemfields rubies up to now is more than $500 million US, over 10 million carats during 12 auctions. Those auctions are held in Singapore. Why Singapore? Because it's in close proximity to the Bangkok traders. The Indian traders can easily go there, and Singapore is very flexible with its import arrangements, while Thailand is not. So keep in mind that Mozambique was already the most important ruby source in the world before Gemfields came in. So the biggest gemstone mining company in the world has a lot to thank to Mozambique, not the other way around. Of course, when there's one company doing it, everybody wants to do it as well. So in 2014, we had MRM forming, Montepuez Ruby Mining, Gemfields and Muriti. In 2016, other people took claims around it. Companies like Metals of Africa, Mustang Resources. Those are people without experience in gemstone mining, but they see the huge boom. It is a sexy industry. Gemstone mining sounds really cool, but they don't realize the challenges of it, so they got into it as well. In 2017, there's a company called Fura Gems that got into it as well. They got a lot of claims, and they basically absorbed all the other companies. So right now, there are 2 mining companies that own all the licenses. That is Fura and that is Gemfields. However, there are only 2 communities producing gemstones, and that is the artisanal mining community and Gemfields. Fura Gemstones has most of the ruby mining licenses, but to my knowledge, they haven't sold a single ruby up till now. So you can see that Mozambique became the most important ruby source in less than 10 years. It has been a turbulent development of that deposit. A lot of balances have been found and then imbalanced again, and then a new equilibrium needed to be found. So it has been very challenging. The main ruby suppliers for the trade right now are the artisanal mining community and Gemfields company. And although it's only been 10 years, within those 10 years, a lot of things has changed. It went from 100% informal, artisanal, all the way to a significant part formalized. It is very hard to put a number on it. We know how much ruby has been sold documented. We don't know how much ruby has been sold undocumented and came through the trade before that. But just realize that if you go to a gem show where there's a lot of rubies around, just imagine that there's not a single ruby available there. If you go to major trade shows for rubies like Bangkok, the AGTA show, Hong Kong show, just imagine that there's not a single ruby from Mozambique around, and imagine what the impact would be on the global ruby trade. So right now we'll take a look at the gemology of Mozambican ruby. The gemology, with that I mean really a focus on what it looks like internally and externally, and also at treatments a little bit. So I'll go over this again, that we have those two types of Mozambican ruby, because I really want you to take this away. You have a type that we call in the lab meninganized, nice quality, relates to the red mine. They're small, they're flat, but incredible color, strong fluorescence. You see in this photo, it's too fluorescent to really capture it on camera. So these are really nice stones, but usually flat and smaller. The other type, Muglotto, Bosom, the orange mine, they're bulky, they're larger, they'll cut large, nice, clean stones, but their fluorescence is weaker and they have a bit of a darker tone. So appearance-wise, they look very different, but inclusion-wise, they look exactly the same. The inclusions we see in the red mine and the orange mine in meninganized and Muglotto are exactly the same. The abundance of inclusions changes a little bit. We see a lot more inclusions in meninganized than we see in Muglotto. And we see a lot more silk in Muglotto than we see in meninganized. But what we see is essentially the same. So this is what I mean with silk. There's a lot of particles, titanium dioxide in different forms. You can see that there's platelets, more needle-like, very dense. Some areas are completely devoid of it. This is not conclusive for Mozambican origin. Every ruby, every sapphire basically has this in one form or another. What helps you a bit more are these particles. When you zoom in more, you start seeing these reflective platelets. So they reflect in very nice, attractive colors when you light them correctly, but they're very difficult to spot. So I'll show it to you here. There's a ruby right here, and it looks extremely clean. There's this tiny fracture here, there's a little bit of stuff here, but you'd say overall it's extremely clean. When you light it in the correct way using a fiber optic, and this highlights the importance of a fiber optic, this is the exact same stone. The amount of platelets that you can see in the stone is just incredible. And these platelets are very important for heat treatment detection that we will discuss later. Another inclusion that we commonly see are tubes associating with twinning planes. We see this in other deposits as well, and they're actually not super common in the Muglotto stones. They're very common in the meninganized stones. The most common crystals we see are greenish amphiboles. We don't always see that greenish body color because the host of, which is the ruby, is so extremely red colored that that the green color is completely lost. But you see that they have different shapes. Very often we find them in like this more rice grain shaped, but sometimes we just see them as these elongated rods that occur together. Extremely beautiful, very nice to see. If you look at them under cross polars, they light up in the most beautiful colors. And these can help you to distinguish between, for example, Burmese rubies and African rubies. Another inclusion we commonly see are technically called pseudo-hexagonal muscovite with fringes. You have a small mica crystal here in the middle that looks like a hexagon, but mica doesn't have a hexagonal crystal structure, so we call it pseudo-hexagonal, but it has these fringes around it. On the edges of the hexagon, there's these tiny fractures poking out, which is typically something that we see here. Very often there's also this pattern around it of flattened inclusions that we call a rosette structure that lights up if you shine a fiber optic on it under the right angle. Extremely beautiful to look at, very difficult to photograph. So this is a cluster of crystals in the core of a ruby. So you see the very nice hexagonal outline of the ruby. And you see a variety of crystals in there. You see different sizes of those mica crystals that look a bit frosty. But then you also have very nice little cute amphiboles, rod-like, more bean-shaped. So you see a lot of them together in rubies, sometimes clustered, sometimes randomly dispersed. This is one of my favorite inclusions. It's the one they used for the poster, I believe. These are opaque, black reddish crystals. Technically they're black, but they look reddish because they reflect the body color of that ruby. And I've written here, presumably chalcopyrite. I'm going to use this to take a little detour just to highlight to you that GIA does more than the typical gemological research. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to some really advanced research that we're doing in 2 slides. So I've written presumably chalcopyrite because I was not fully convinced. Chalcopyrite is a sulfide mineral with an iron and a copper component, and that copper sounded really weird to me. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go look at it in detail. So we use a technique called EPMA, electron probe microanalyzer, very commonly used in geological sciences, but extremely difficult to work with, and only a few instruments are correctly calibrated around the world. But this measures your chemical composition of your minerals, especially your major elements, very correctly, very accurately. So I've written presumably chalcopyrite. So if we assume that it's going to be a solid chalcopyrite, we expect something like this. A very homogeneous phase that is all going to be chalcopyrite. You can already see it coming. It's not going to look like this. It actually looks like this. So this inclusion is less than 0.3 millimeter wide, but you can see that there's a whole variety of minerals found in there. Very complex mixture of iron, copper, nickel. So I didn't believe there was copper in there. Turns out there is, but there's also a significant nickel component. There's some cobalt in there, all in different crystal forms. At the moment, we still have no idea what this means, but that's what I'm figuring out this year. So that was just that you have an idea that GIA does more advanced research than you sometimes see in the classroom. That research is often shared in academic circles. This project, we're collaborating with Caltech. So that's really advanced. If you're interested in GIA research, that just gives you an idea on some of the levels that we work at. Last, I would like to discuss some of the treatments. I'm sure you all heard about treatments, but I want to remind you why we treat stones. We treat stones to improve the appearance. Usually it's to improve the clarity or to improve the color. So why would we enhance clarity in a Mozambican ruby? There's one type of Mozambican ruby that is really nice in small sizes, but the big sizes are too included. So that one has clarity issues. So that meningonite already has an amazing color, so we don't need to enhance that. But it has pretty low clarity, usually due to abundant fractures. So we want to fix that, and the most common way to fix it is using a technique called flux healing. I don't know if you've already seen this in class, but I'm going to go over it really quick. This is a picture of a ruby with a fracture. This is the fracture right here. Before you heat it, you basically put a flux in there. A flux, usually borax, you fill it up. The definition of a flux is that when it comes in contact with another material, it lowers the melting point. So if you start heating it up, normally corundum melts at 1,800 something Celsius. But when it comes in borax, it melts at around 1,500. So you heat it up to 1,006, and where your borax is in contact with your corundum, it starts melting. Since your borax is mainly in your fracture, because that's where you've put it, that is where your ruby starts melting. When you cool it down again, it recrystallizes, and you basically heal the fracture because you fill it with recrystallized corundum. Of course, there's a lot of stuff trapped in there, leftover flux, air bubbles, different intermediate species between corundum and the flux that you use. So it's pretty easy to spot this, but it is extremely durable. You're not gonna break this stone at this fracture because the fracture really is healed. How to recognize it? This is something you probably all recognize because this is exactly the same that you see in a flux-grown synthetic ruby. So this is a healed fracture. where a lot of the flux has been trapped, and when it cooled down, it contracts and it forms these web-like patterns, but they can look very different. This is another example of a flux-healed fracture. So the appearance is very different, but it's all pretty reminiscent of flux-grown synthetic rubies. However, if you see this kind of pattern together with natural inclusions, and very often this is found in planes where the fracture used to be, you're pretty sure that this is a flux-healed ruby. Another technique used is glass filling. You just stuff the fractures with glass. That's what happens there. You add a glass during treatment and it gets sucked into the fractures, and then your fractures are filled with glass. This is what those stones look like before. This is what they look like after. So really good improvement. However, the glass, they usually use a glass with a refractive index similar to corundum, which is very high for a glass. So your glass is less durable. It often has a very high lead content, so it's very easy to spot with chemical analysis. And the tricky part is you can color this glass. You can take blue rough and turn it yellow by adding yellow glass in it. I have seen glass-filled, very nice rubies that once they were put in lemon juice with Coca-Cola, come out as fractured, white, opaque stones. So you can really have a drastic impact. I mentioned here that they're less durable, high lead content, easy to pick up with chemical analysis. Nobody will ever need chemical analysis to prove glass filling of most rubies. It is one of the easiest treatments to detect if you know what to look for. So the first thing you need to look for is colored flashes. These colored flashes are at the contact of the glass and the fracture. You get most of the time blue flashes, sometimes yellow or green. Very easy to spot the moment you put them under a loupe and you rock them a little bit. I've seen it in really big stones just when somebody had it in their ring, just blue flashes in the ruby like that. The easiest way, of course, is just look for glass bubbles. You guys have all seen a lot of glass during the GG courses, I hope. It's the same thing. You just see a lot of bubbles, but there's also a lot of natural features. You have all these tiny fingerprints. You have the colored flashes again. But you often will not even need to look at the internal world of those stones, because this is what the surface looked like. This is the table of a glass-filled ruby. You see it's pretty big. It's more than 4 centimeters. But you just see the polish lines in the glass because it is so much softer. You see the luster differences, and you just see the big holes where glass bubbles were cut through. So they're extremely easy to spot, but if you make that mistake, it can be very costly, because the stones will look really nice, but if you, they're very unstable and very inexpensive to buy as well. Now, another treatment that we do on Mozambican rubies is to enhance the color. So I mentioned already that the Muglotto type has the really good sizes, has the really good clarity, but the color is often closed. I'll repeat that again, that a closed color, we mean that the tone is a little bit too dark. The color isn't exactly lively, so you want to lighten, open up the color again. And that is what they do with traditional heat treatment. So traditional heat treatment, no chemical additives. So you don't add any glass during the treatment, you don't add any flux. Typically, this was done at temperatures around 1,500 degrees for rubies. But now with Mozambican rubies and Sri Lankan people getting involved in ruby trading, they've adapted the typical traditional Sri Lankan techniques used for sapphires to rubies. And right now they're pushing it to 700 degrees and lower, which makes it extremely hard to detect. Some of these techniques, like my boss is doing right here, are artisanal. They've been described 800 years ago, but this reaches temperatures of 600-700 degrees. And this works extremely well for some of the Mozambican rubies. So I hope everyone can see it on this screen. I think it's more visible on the side screens, that this is a stone before and after treatment. So you see that this piece of rough has a bit of a darker, more purplish zone on the top here that is almost completely removed with treatment at 800 degrees for only 160 minutes. So this is not very intense treatment. This is not going to leave a lot of traces. So it's going to make it very hard to detect, but has a drastic impact on ruby color. Because if you cut a stone out of this one, this whole dark patch will reflect into the stone and will really bring the stone's tone up. Here you can see it again if you look from a different angle at a different piece, that you've got these bluish purplish streaks going through the body of your ruby, completely removed with low temperature heat treatment. This is in the same conditions, so also 800 degrees for only 160 minutes. Of course, to detect heat treatment, the microscope is still your best friend. Some of it is very obvious. Crystals start exploding, you start forming fractures around it. When it's these black opaque inclusions like this one, it's really easy to spot because they do something that is described as bleeding out. They form so you have this small black sphere, it forms a fracture around it, and that whole sphere gets filled with black opaque mass. So where you only had a small little ball in the beginning, you now have this massive disc in your ruby, which is extremely obvious. So people usually grind these inclusions away before. But you can see more typical features like this little crystal here that formed this expansion fracture around it. So that's already a good indication, but this does not always develop at these low temperatures. What we use most often are these particles. The particles that you see here, they have a bright part and a not so bright part. And it is in that second part that you start forming these bright spots, even at very low temperature. So this is all done on stones that we've treated ourselves, which means that we took a stone guaranteed untreated, a stone that I took out of the mine, B-type sample or C-type sample. We documented it and we heat treated it at 200 degrees. We took all the photos again in exact the same position, heat treated it at 300 degrees. Take all the photos again, repeat until we're at 1006. And that gives us the entire evolution, and we can see at which temperatures these inclusions start to change. So you can see that it's very subtle, but once you see it, it's a very obvious clue for low temperature treatment. Of course, we also rely on advanced technology. Advanced technology, FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. So it absorbs certain wavelengths in the far infrared. The spectra that we usually see before heating in a certain section is this one, where we have what we call the 3309 peak. The 3309 peak is always there. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. But after we low temperature heat treat it, we develop what we call a 3309 series with these two additional peaks. So when these peaks form, it's pretty good evidence that this stone has been low temperature heat treatment. Of course, this all depends on how well your machine is calibrated. You see it's very subtle. But of course, there is always a but. This series doesn't always develop. Here again, we have a series before heating with the 3309 peak. It became smaller after heating, but there's no sign of the other peaks. So when we see that series, it's a very good indicator of heat treatment. When we don't see that series, it doesn't mean that it's not heat treated. So just to give you an overview of treatment, this shows you that not all Mozambican rubies require heat treatment. I've only discussed the ones that need treatment. The top stones don't need to be treated. But lucky for Mozambique, the stones that aren't 100% when they come out of the ground can be enhanced, can be improved in all kinds of ways possible. So with heat treatment without added chemicals, flux healing, glass filling, making very big sizes, making very clean stones, keeping very small sizes, creating a whole range of colors. So people have asked me a lot, like, what is the future of Mozambican ruby? I think right now we can say that the amount of Mozambican ruby in the market that has been produced is unbelievable. In just 10 years, the amount of ruby that has come out of the ground is unimaginable, and it has had an impact on the trade that we've never seen before. For the future, I can say, I think that the cowboy years are over. With the cowboy years, I mean the Wild West is gone. It has been chaos and mayhem in the first 5 years, but I think by now the situation has stabilized. There's an equilibrium between the different parties and players there. How long that equilibrium will last, only time will tell, but at least it has been stable for the last 2-3 years. And the market accepts Mozambique as a ruby source. I think that's most important of all, because the market is what ultimately demands whether a source is going to be a success or not. If the market doesn't want Mozambican ruby, they can get all the ruby out of the ground they want. It's not going to change anything. And just to give you an example of that, I've got a pair of rubies here from Mozambique. Both of them are really big, 14.5 and 13 something carat. And those have set the record for Mozambican ruby price-wise. Does anyone have an idea for how much money they sold? An educated or a less educated guess? Or just a complete gamble?
50 million.
50 million total. Do you have how much is that per carat? 25? 2 million, that's a little too much. I think the most expensive ruby that's sold is from Burma is 1.2 million a carat. I get confirming looks from the people who know better than I do, so 1.2 million a carat is correct. These sold for more than 200,000 US dollar a carat in 2017, and I heard they're coming back up for auction, and the reserve price is set for at least double. So I think the reserve price is set at 450,000 a carat right now, so it's expected to go over that, and that has just doubled in the last 2 years. So, as a summary in the end, I would like you to remember that Mozambican rubies were unheard of 10 years ago. There wasn't a single one around. While right now, they're the most common ruby in the marketplace, they're becoming the most common ruby in the trading environment. The characteristics of Mozambican ruby are extremely diverse. I mean, different color shades, different sizes, different treatments, which all results in different price points. But all of that together results in Mozambique providing a ruby for everyone who wants one. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions. I believe there is a microphone somewhere for people who have questions. If you don't have questions, that works out as well.
Question here for you, Wim.
Go for it.
Hi, my name is Aaron, and I have a question for you. Out of all your credentials that you've managed to get under your belt over the years, which do you find most applicable in a day-to-day as a field gemologist?
Common sense.
I like that.
Just using your brain is what I do most of the time, because that helps you everywhere.
Great talk. Do you know what are those shiny inclusions that are like turn shiny after you heat them? What are those inclusions?
Those platelets?
Yeah, the plate, shiny
No,
plates.
we don't really know exactly what they are. There's different theories whether they're very thin rutile platelets, maybe they're just thin films and they're like empty, but we don't know.
Are they found in other corundum crystals?
Yes, you see them in a few other deposits, but most of the applications for those inclusions are in Mozambican ruby, because Mozambican ruby is the most common one in the world.
Thank you, Peter. There's a slide where you show the collection of GIA in Bangkok on ruby, sapphires, but now there's a different amount.
Yeah.
And the amount for those, is it based on the market value and demand, or why is something more than the other?
Well, you have to remember GIA Field Gemology exists to serve the GIA research team. The GIA research team supports the GIA identification services. Part of those identification services is country of origin determination, and the biggest demand for country of origin determination is on ruby and sapphire. So that's where we've done most of our work on. The first 10 years have been extremely aggressive collecting of ruby and sapphire from every source in the world. Now we're backing that up with other less common stones, stones that we had less issues with, less demand for, from a research, from an identification, from a client perspective. So that has nothing to do with market value directly. Of course, because ruby and sapphire are the most expensive colored stones, people are gonna put more value on a report on it. So we are gonna put more effort in our research on those stones because we get more demand for it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Go for it.
My question is, what instruments and tools do you bring in the field, and how do you use them?
what I always carry with me is a loop, just a standard loop, because I can use that for rough. But what I use most often is just a simple torch. You can use the flashlight of your phone, because that helps you for a couple of things. You can judge clarity of a stone. You can judge color in known lighting conditions, because people will always try to sell you blue sapphires under a blue umbrella, because that makes them look so good. And they will try to sell you rubies under a pink umbrella, because that makes them look a lot better. So if you have your own light, you at least know the lighting conditions a little bit. So you can use that. You can judge clarity. You can estimate the dichroism, so which orientation your stone is, which can be important if you want to facet it, or if you want to study inclusions in a certain direction. So a torch is the most commonly used tool for me when I look for rough. Flashlight, torch, yeah.
So, going back to Mozambique, I'm got my BA in geology at University of Wyoming. So, do you know if those companies are hiring any field geologists to do more academic research on mapping out the surface geology to pinpoint the sediments where these rubies are found, just so that way they can maximize their efforts in mining, so they're not digging a hole?
Last time I was there, they had 20,000 exploration people working for them. Those are the artisanal miners. There has never been really any need for them to have an extensive exploration team, because there's 20,000 artisanal miners looking for stones already, and you just follow their lead. But you'd have to look with those companies themselves if they hire any people at geology positions, which they do.
I guess, do you know if GIA hires them to help?
No. I mean, GIA goes to those places to go and take a look, collect samples, but we do not endorse them. We do not collaborate with them. We're happy that we're allowed to go there, and we're buddies, but that's as far as it goes.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for the excellent presentation. The two questions I had from reading the review were actually answered in it.
All right.
So what I'm left with is asking, what could a student here at GIA who's interested in being a field gemologist, what guidance do you have if they're interested in pursuing that career path?
Well, you have to realize that GIA field gemologists are a part of the GIA research team. And for the GIA research team, they're asking for certain academic credentials, which is usually master's degree or higher. Geology, chemistry, physics, that all works. Then, of course, it's a role that you grow into, because you need a lot of experience that you don't learn in school, just by traveling. And I think right now there's a lot of people doing field gemology at GIA that are joining us in the field, but that is just based on their own research interest and on their own specialties. When you go to a Paraíba mine, it makes sense to bring a tourmaline expert with you, and there's at least one tourmaline expert at GIA that you can find. Same applies, like when you go to, you can always find within GIA's research team, you can find the specialists you need, so we rarely have to go look externally for those. So just getting into the GIA research team is, whether directly into the team or growing into it from either a diamond grading into identification or an identification gemologist position, that is most likely. All right.
Hi, Wim.
Hi.
I think last time you spoke about opals and all the new finds. We emphasized mainly on the big three. But what else is there? What's big for 2020? Have you found something exciting? Because you are the people that find the first source of whatever that is new, never seen
Well,
before.
No, I want to clarify that I'm not the one that finds it. I'm the one
You
that
would-
goes and I go check when somebody tells me that they find something cool.
Okay, is there
so you-
something coming out for this year?
I'll hope to figure out next week in Tucson.
Oh, I wanted to know. I'm going there.
Do you have a scoop for me, or?
No, I don't. But you haven't seen anything new?
No, I think overall production has been fairly low everywhere. I think the trends that we started seeing last year will continue. And then I'm talking about tourmaline from Congo, extremely nice green stones in very big sizes in all shades of green. And then gray spinels and the general spinel trend will, I think, keep going. But apart from that, I mean, this could all be nonsense. It has to be confirmed next week, of course.
I want to ask you, as a student that gonna graduate for the GG program at GIA, if we want to learn more in depth about emerald, rubies, and sapphire, what direction should we be exploring or looking into right now?
If there's one thing you need to look at, it is stones. Go wherever the stones are and look at them. Find someone who can show you stones, and it is easier than you think. The most experienced traders with 50 years in the emerald trade, for example, all those guys are going to be in Tucson next week. Even when a young guy that they don't know shows a little bit of passion, and you can just hit the right spark with those guys, there's no stopping them for an hour and a half. They love nothing more than to talk about their stones. And that's just 50 years of knowledge that they're just gonna flood you with. So just start talking to those people, look at stones, and ask questions about it. They love nothing more than to talk about a stone. If you see two stones in a window, ask them what's the difference between these? What's the difference in price? What's the difference in inclusion? Where does this come from? Where does this come from? And they're gonna show and tell you the most amazing things. I think we've got one more here.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation. I was wondering about the slide a while back when you were talking about the Fiora group and the Mustang group and how Fiora hadn't publicly sold or traded until last year. Do you think that's because their mines aren't producing as much, or they're producing enough and they're trying to watch the market trends for when they can resell at a higher price?
It is impossible to say. I haven't visited the Fiora mines. I've talked with a few people there, but they always say they keep postponing their first auction. I mean, it's hard to say until we see some stones. So we'll just have to wait for that.
My question is, in general, in looking at the pictures, I saw kind of, at least, like there were some rubies that had a slight pinkish tint. Some of the lower quality rubies had a more of a pure shred. In general, in your experience, is there a particular shade that is most commercially viable in higher end jewelry?
Whatever your client wants. No, there's a market for every shade of every color. I think the best example is what I mentioned before, gray spinel. The most common reaction I heard on gray spinel 4 years ago is, ugh. Well, right now, people can't get enough of them. So you're gonna find, I know a lot of people that buy under the motto, if I like it, someone else is gonna like it. And they buy the craziest stuff. But they find a buyer for it. Because, I mean, there is no such thing as the perfect ruby. Your perfect ruby is very different than your neighbor perfect ruby. If you ask 10 people what their favorite color is, you're going to get 11 different answers. So yeah, it's impossible to say which one. Of course, there are market trends, and some of those are regional, some of those vary through time. Fashion plays a big role in that. But in general, there is no better color.
All right, and we have room for one more question. Anybody new? Anybody else? All right, we've got a winner.
Sold.
Just wanted to offer it there.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm just going to ask you.
Sure.
With your knowledge and very extensive knowledge about rubies, and you've been to probably almost every single famous mines for rubies in the world, why are you still at GIA? What's your passions?
Well, first of all, GIA gives me the freedom to go to all these places. The fact that when I go to a ruby mine, it's not hi, Wim is here. No, it's hi, GIA is here. And that opens all the doors. The moment I lose that GIA badge, more than half of the doors will close for me. So having that advantage of being able to be independent, because I get funded by GIA, who is not related to any of these mining companies, mining areas as well. So that's the main reason. Plus, I get access to the most incredible research team here as well. I know people that are working in a private sector and they have to wait 6 months for certain simple analysis, while I ask for the most complicated analysis and I have the results after lunch. So that's a luxury that is just incredible. And then why I don't go into the trade, it's a crazy world out there. I know a lot of people in the trades. I don't know a single one that made a lot of money there. So if that was the question, I know way more people that lost everything than that won something. So it's an incredible gamble to go into Ruby trade. So that's why I'm still at GIA. All right. Thank you very much for your questions. And thank you everyone for watching online as well. Thank you.